The wind whipped across the desolate prairie, carrying the dust and the silence. It was a lonely sound, a sound that echoed the emptiness inside Eleanor Vance. Her ranch, once a place of bustling activity and shared laughter, now felt like a tomb. Her husband, John, was gone, taken by a sudden illness, and with him a vital piece of her world had vanished. The vast expanse of land that had once felt like a promise now just felt big, too big for one person to manage. Eleanor moved through her days on the autopilot. Feed the chickens, check the fences, mend the worn clothes. Each task was a small anchor, preventing her from drifting away entirely. But at night, the quiet would descend, heavy and suffocating. She'd stare out at the dark horizon, seeing only the endless repetition of days ahead, each one looking just like the last. Hope felt like a forgotten language. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Eleanor rode her aging mare, Bess, along the far pasture fence, she saw it. A tiny speck moving erratically against the muted browns and greys of the landscape. As she drew closer, the speck resolved into a shape. A horse! But this was no ordinary sight. It was a colt, impossibly small and alone, its ribs showing through its thin coat. It staggered, its legs trembling, as if it had walked for days. And then, a detail that made Eleanor's heart clench. It wore a tattered halter, a clear sign it had been abandoned, left to face the brutal indifference of the wild. A primal instinct stirred within Eleanor, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Compassion. This creature, as lost and vulnerable as she was, deserved a chance. She urged Bess forward, her voice soft, a croak after so much silence. "Easy now, little one, easy." The colt flinched, ready to bolt, but its strength was too depleted. It watched her. Wide, dark, eyes filled with a fear that Eleanor understood all too well. It was the look of something left behind, something that believed there was no one coming. She dismounted slowly, speaking in gentle, continuous tones. Bess, sensing Eleanor's intent, stood patiently. The colt, sensing no immediate threat, watched with a fragile curiosity. Eleanor approached cautiously, her hand outstretched. The air crackled with a silent question. Would this be another disappointment, another moment of being overlooked? She reached out, her calloused fingers brushing against the colt's bony neck. It shivered, but didn't pull away. It was a connection, tenuous and fragile, but it was there. She knew even then that this was a turning point. She didn't know how or why, but this abandoned creature, this tiny spark of life in the vast emptiness, had found its way to her. And in doing so, it had begun to pull her back from the brink. She'd named him Hope. It felt like a daring, almost foolish thing to do, given his condition and her own state of mind. But as she coaxed him onto Bess's back, his small weight surprisingly heavy, a new, quiet resolve settled over her. She would bring him home. She would fight for him. And perhaps, just perhaps, in saving him, she might find a way to save herself. The journey back to the ranch was slow, the colt unsteady. But with Eleanor's constant reassuring whispers, he held on. Each step was a testament to a silent pact, an unspoken promise forged on the lonely prairie. This wasn't just about a horse. It was about two souls finding each other in the deepest of solitudes. The road back to the ranch was agonizingly slow. Eleanor, walking beside Bess, kept a steady hand on the colt's flank, her own body a bridge between his fragile form and the mare's sturdier presence. He was so light, so thin. His ribs felt like sharp stones beneath her fingers. Every breath he took was shallow, a whisper against the vast silence of the plains. Eleanor talked to him constantly, her voice a low, steady murmur that seemed to calm his trembling. "Almost there, little one, almost home. You're safe now, you're safe." She didn't know if he understood the words, but she hoped he understood the intent. She hoped he felt the warmth of her hand, the quiet strength in her presence. Bess, bless her steady heart, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, never pulling ahead, always waiting for Eleanor and the colt. Her presence was a calm, unwavering counterpoint to the colt's fragility. Eleanor kept her eyes on him, watching for any sign of distress. She imagined him running free, a wild spirit on the open range, and then the crushing reality of his current state hit her again. Abandoned, forgotten. It was a word that resonated deeply within her own hollowed-out existence. As the familiar silhouette of her ranch buildings finally appeared on the horizon, a strange mix of relief and dread washed over Eleanor. Relief, because they were almost there, that this ordeal was nearing an end. Dread, because what then? What could she possibly do for this dying creature? She had no vet, no specialized knowledge. All she had was her own weary determination and a farmhouse that felt too big and too quiet. But she had promised. She had made a silent vow on that dusty pasture, and she would see it through. They reached the corral, a sturdy enclosure that had once held John's prize stallions. Now it felt like a sanctuary. Eleanor gently lowered the colt from Bess's back. He wobbled, finding his footing, his legs still unsteady. She led him into the softest, driest part of the corral, away from the biting wind. The smell of hay, sweet and familiar, filled the air. She had prepared a small, sheltered corner, hoping it would offer some comfort. The first few days were a blur of worry and sleepless nights. Eleanor would wake at the slightest sound, rushing out to the corral to check on him. She'd found an old bucket and filled it with fresh water, setting it within his reach. She brought out fresh, sweet hay, scattering it where he could easily find it. He ate slowly at first, hesitant, as if still expecting it to be taken away. But hunger, that powerful primal force, eventually won out. He'd nibble, then chew, then eat with more urgency, his body beginning the slow, arduous process of healing. Eleanor sat outside the corral for hours, just watching him. She'd learned his small habits, the way he'd favor his left hind leg when he stood too long, the way he'd lift his head at the sound of birdsong, a flicker of interest in his dark eyes. She talked to him, narrating her day, sharing her quiet thoughts. It was a one-sided conversation, but it filled the silence, and it felt less lonely. She named him Hope, a name that felt audacious, a defiant whisper against the encroaching despair. It was a name that carried the weight of her own yearning for a brighter future. She noticed subtle changes. The frantic energy born of fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious calm. He'd still startle at loud noises, but he'd quickly look to her, his dark eyes seeking reassurance. He began to stand straighter, his once hollowed flanks filling out, little by little. The journey was far from over, but he was no longer just surviving. He was starting to live. And with each small victory, Eleanor felt a corresponding lightness bloom within her own chest. Hope was, in his own quiet way, beginning to mend her too. The first time he nickered back to her, it was a sound so soft, so tentative. Eleanor almost didn't hear it. She was leaning against the corral fence, watching him graze. When he lifted his head, his ears pricked forward. A low, rumbling sound emanated from his throat. It wasn't a whinny of distress, but something else entirely. A question? A greeting? Eleanor froze, her heart leaping. She slowly, carefully spoke his name. Hope? He took a step towards her, his gaze steady, and then he nickered again, a little stronger this time. It was a sound of recognition, a sign that he saw her, that he acknowledged her presence not as a threat, but as something familiar, something safe. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. It was a small sound, a simple response, but it was a world of difference. It was proof that he was healing, that he was connecting. It was the first true echo of life she had heard on the ranch in months. As the weeks turned into months, hope grew stronger. The gauntness disappeared, replaced by the sleek muscle of a healthy young horse. His coat, once dull and matted, now shone with a rich chestnut hue. He'd learned to trust Eleanor implicitly. He would follow her around the corral, nudging her hand for a scratch behind the ears, his soft muzzle pressing gently against her arm. He even started responding to her voice, trotting towards her when she called his name. He was no longer just an abandoned creature she was nursing back to health. He was becoming a companion. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their interactions. She'd spend hours in the corral, sitting on an overturned bucket, reading her late husband's books aloud, or simply talking about her day. Hope would stand nearby, sometimes grazing, sometimes just watching her with those intelligent, liquid eyes. He became the silent audience to her grief, the steady presence that absorbed her unspoken sorrows. He never judged, never offered platitudes. He simply was. And in his quiet way, he was teaching her to be present, to find solace in the simple act of companionship. She noticed other changes in herself. The ranch, once a monument to her loss, began to feel like a place of possibility again. She started tackling repairs she had been putting off, tasks that suddenly seemed less daunting with Hope's quiet presence nearby. She even found herself humming as she worked, a sound that had been absent for far too long. Hope's recovery was a visible measure of her own healing. Each pound he gained, each confident stride he took, mirrored a step she took away from the depths of her despair. One crisp morning, as she was tending to the hay bales, Hope nudged her hand more insistently than usual. He whinnied, a clear, bright sound, and then nudged the gate of the corral. Eleanor looked at him, then at the vast open pasture beyond. She had kept him safe, protected him, but he was a horse. He was meant to run. She hesitated for a moment, a pang of fear tightening her chest. What if he ran away? What if he disappeared into the vastness, just like John had? But then she looked at Hope. His eyes were bright, alert. His body was strong, vibrant. He was ready. She walked to the corral gate, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the latch. She looked at Hope, her voice soft but firm. "All right, boy. Let's go for a ride, a real ride." As the gate swung open, Hope didn't bolt. He stood for a moment, his head held high, surveying the open land. Then, with a joyful buck, he trotted out, Eleanor following on Bess, a wide, genuine smile finally gracing her face. The prairie no longer felt like an empty void, but a canvas waiting to be explored, a shared adventure for a widow and her rescued colt. The first few weeks after Hope's full recovery were a careful dance between Eleanor's desire to let him experience freedom and her lingering fear of losing him. She'd open the corral gate each morning, letting him wander into the adjacent pasture. He'd graze contentedly, or trot with surprising speed across the open ground, his body a picture of newfound health and vitality. Eleanor would watch from her porch, Bess often grazing nearby, a silent guardian. But there was a part of Eleanor that yearned for more. She remembered the joy of riding John's horses, the wind in her hair, the powerful rhythm of a strong animal beneath her. Hope was no longer a fragile creature to be coddled. He was a young, vibrant horse. She started leading him, just walking him around the ranch, letting him explore the familiar boundaries of his world. He was curious, attentive, his senses alive to every new scent and sound. Then came the day she decided to try riding him. It felt like a monumental step, fraught with both excitement and trepidation. She brushed his coat until it gleamed, her movements confident and sure. She found a soft, well-worn saddle, one John had used for lighter rides. As she gently placed it on his back, Hope stood perfectly still, his muscles flexing subtly beneath her touch. He trusted her. That was the only certainty she needed. Mounting him was a moment suspended in time. He was taller than Bess, his energy a coiled spring. As she settled into the saddle, Eleanor took a deep breath. She spoke his name, her voice calm and reassuring. "Easy, boy. Just a little walk." Hope responded with a gentle forward motion, his gait smooth and surprisingly steady. Eleanor's initial apprehension melted away, replaced by a growing sense of exhilaration. This wasn't just riding a horse, it was a partnership. He wasn't just carrying her, he was moving with her, responding to her subtle shifts in weight, her quiet cues. They rode through the familiar pastures, but everything looked different from this new vantage point. The land seemed grander, more beautiful. The silence was no longer oppressive, but peaceful. Hope's powerful strides ate up the ground, and Eleanor felt a connection, a rhythm that transcended words. It was a physical manifestation of the bond they had forged, a silent conversation between two souls who had found each other in the wilderness. As they rounded a bend and saw the vast open prairie stretching before them, Hope let out a joyful whinny. Eleanor, her heart soaring, urged him forward. They broke into a gallop, the wind whipping around them, a widow and her rescued colt, finally running free together. The image of Eleanor and Hope galloping across the prairie became a regular sight. Neighbours, few and far between, would talk, some with curiosity, others with a touch of wonder. They'd seen Eleanor, a woman consumed by grief, slowly emerge from her shell. They'd seen the abandoned colt, a creature on the brink of death, transform into a magnificent animal. And they'd seen the quiet bond that had grown between them. It was a story that whispered of resilience, of hope found in the most unexpected places. Eleanor's ranch, once a place of stagnant sorrow, began to hum with renewed life. She tackled repairs with a vigor she hadn't felt in years. She cleared out old, unused buildings, preparing them for new purposes. She even started planting a small vegetable garden, her hands finding joy in the feel of the earth. Hope was always nearby, a constant calming presence. He'd watch her work or graze peacefully in the nearby pasture, his sleek coat catching the sunlight. One afternoon, a neighbouring rancher, Silas, rode over. He was a gruff but kind man who had known Eleanor and John for years. He'd seen her riding Hope, the colt who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. He commented on Hope's transformation, his disbelief clear in his voice. "Never thought I'd see that scrawny thing grow into such a fine horse, Eleanor. You've worked a miracle." Eleanor just smiled, her gaze resting on Hope. "He worked a miracle on me, Silas." Silas, a man not given to sentiment, nodded slowly. He saw the change in Eleanor, the light back in her eyes, the strength in her posture. He saw that she wasn't just caring for the horse. She was thriving. He understood in his own quiet way that sometimes the greatest strength comes from nurturing another life. He stayed for a while, sharing a cup of coffee on the porch, the conversation flowing easily, filled with shared memories and quiet observations about the land. It was a moment of simple, profound connection, a testament to the way life, in its own persistent way, finds a way to bloom again. The change in Eleanor wasn't just about her own spirit. It rippled outwards. Her renewed energy meant the ranch was better maintained, a small beacon of stability in the sparsely populated area. She started helping other neighbours when she could, offering a hand with chores or lending a listening ear. Hope, in his own way, contributed to this. His presence seemed to lift spirits. Children from nearby ranches who had been shy around the grieving widow were drawn to the gentle, curious colt. They'd visit, and Eleanor would let them pet Hope, their faces alight with wonder. One particularly hot summer day, a small brush fire broke out on the far end of Silas's property. It was spreading quickly, fanned by the dry winds. Silas and his few hands were struggling to contain it. Eleanor, seeing the smoke from her porch, didn't hesitate. She saddled up Hope. He was calm and steady under her, his powerful legs eating up the distance. When she arrived, the fire was dangerously close to Silas's barn. Without a word, Eleanor rode Hope, using his speed and agility to help create a firebreak, guiding him through the dry grass, kicking up dust and dirt to smother the flames where she could. Hope, sensing the urgency, worked with an almost uncanny intelligence, following Eleanor's commands with unwavering trust. Other neighbours, seeing Eleanor's decisive action, rallied. They formed a bucket brigade. Working together, their combined efforts slowly but surely gaining control of the fire. By sunset, the fire was out. Exhausted, covered in soot, Eleanor leaned down and buried her face in Hope's sweaty neck. He whinnied softly, nudging her cheek. Silas, his face grim but relieved, walked over. He looked at Eleanor, then at Hope. "You did good, Eleanor, real good. That horse of yours, he's something special." Eleanor just nodded, her heart full. Hope wasn't just a rescue anymore. He was a hero. and in helping her community and facing danger alongside her, he had solidified their bond, proving that their story was one of mutual rescue, a testament to the enduring power of connection. The story of Eleanor and Hope became more than just a local anecdote. It became a legend whispered among the prairie communities. It was a tale of how a broken woman and a discarded animal, both on the verge of giving up, found each other, and in doing so found the strength to heal and to thrive. Eleanor never remarried, but she was never truly alone again. Hope remained her constant companion, his presence a warm, steady anchor in her life. She continued to manage the ranch, her competence and resilience becoming an inspiration. She used her renewed energy and resources to help others, organizing support for families facing hardship, her own past grief fueling her deep empathy. The ranch, once a symbol of her solitude, became a place of welcome and community. Visitors would often stop by, drawn by the stories of the widow and her remarkable horse. Eleanor would share her simple meals, her quiet wisdom, and always she would speak of hope. She'd recount the day she found him, a skeletal creature shivering in the vastness. She'd describe his slow, steady recovery, the way his eyes had begun to hold a spark of life again. She'd talk about the joy of riding him, the feeling of freedom they shared across the open plains, and she would always emphasize the truth, that while she had saved him, he had saved her far more profoundly. He had given her a reason to get out of bed, a purpose to strive for, a warm presence that filled the emptiness in her heart. Children would marvel at Hope, his magnificent coat and gentle disposition, a stark contrast to the image of the frail colt they'd heard about. Eleanor would often let them pet him, their small hands reaching out to touch the source of so much hope. They learned, through Eleanor's gentle words, that even in the darkest of times, when all seems lost, a flicker of kindness, a moment of connection, can lead to an extraordinary transformation. As the years passed, Eleanor and Hope aged together, their bond deepening with each season. He became a symbol of resilience for the entire region, a living testament to the fact that no matter how abandoned or broken one might feel, there is always the possibility of healing, of finding purpose, and of experiencing profound love. The wind still whispered across the prairie, but now it carried a different kind of story, a story of hope reborn, of a widow and her colt who found salvation in each other, forever changing the landscape of their lives and the hearts of those who heard their tale. Their shared journey from despair to vibrant life proved that sometimes the most unexpected friendships are the ones that lead us home, to ourselves. This story of Eleanor and Hope became a reminder to everyone who heard it, a reminder that even when you feel completely alone, like there's no one left who cares, help can appear in the most surprising ways. A forgotten trail, a chance encounter, a creature on the brink of despair. It's about looking past the obvious, past the hardship, and seeing the potential for connection, for life. Eleanor would often reflect on those first few days after finding Hope, the gnawing emptiness, the overwhelming silence. She had felt like a ghost, drifting through days that held no meaning. And then, that tiny trembling creature had stumbled into her life. He was so fragile, so utterly dependent, and in tending to him, in fighting for his survival, Eleanor found herself fighting for her own. She poured all her remaining strength, all her unspoken love, into nurturing him back to health. And as Hope grew stronger, so did she. His ribs began to fill out, his coat regained its luster, his eyes lost their fear and gained a curious sparkle. Eleanor watched these changes, and she saw her own reflection in them. Her own spirit, dulled by grief, began to regain its shine. The ranch, once a hollow echo of her past, started to feel like a home again. The chores, once burdensome, became acts of purpose. The simple act of riding Hope became more than just exercise. It was a reaffirmation of life. The wind in her hair, the powerful rhythm of his stride, the vast openness of the prairie stretching before them. It was a feeling of liberation she hadn't thought possible. It was a shared joy, a silent understanding between two souls who had found solace in each other's company. Neighbours who had seen her withdrawn and lost for so long were amazed by the transformation. They saw the light return to her eyes, the confident set of her shoulders. They saw the way she smiled when she spoke of hope, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. They realized that sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from grand gestures or profound words, but from the quiet, unwavering presence of another living being. The story of Eleanor and Hope spread, not through sensational headlines, but through quiet conversations on dusty porches, through shared meals at community gatherings. It was a story that resonated because it was so real. It spoke to the universal human experience of loss and loneliness, and the profound power of connection to overcome it. It showed that even when life feels like it's at its bleakest, hope can still find a way in, often in the most unexpected forms. Eleanor never forgot John. His memory remained a cherished part of her, a quiet foundation upon which her new life was built. But hope filled the silence, provided companionship, and reminded her that love, in its many forms, can endure and even flourish after loss. He was a living, breathing testament to the fact that a single act of compassion can ripple outwards, healing not just one life, but many. Her ranch, once a place of solitary sorrow, became a haven. Visitors were always welcome, drawn by the warmth of Eleanor's spirit and the majestic presence of hope. She'd tell their story, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a story of redemption, of finding light in the deepest darkness. She'd often say, with a gentle smile, that hope didn't just follow her home, he led her back to life itself. And as the sun set over the endless prairie, casting long shadows across the land, Eleanor and Hope would stand together, a silent, powerful symbol of resilience, love, and the enduring promise of a new dawn. Their shared journey was a constant reminder that even the most abandoned among us can find a home, and that in saving another, we often save ourselves. Eleanor nursed him day and night. His ribs felt like sharp stones under her touch. She whispered words of comfort, hoping he understood. He ate slowly, hesitantly, his small body clinging to life. Each breath was a victory. She named him Hope, a defiant whisper against the crushing silence. Eleanor and Hope's story reminds us that connection heals. If you found hope in their journey, please like and subscribe. Share this story to spread the message that even the most abandoned can find love and purpose. What unexpected friendships have changed your life? Tell us below.